Hey guys, thanks for checking in with me on this video. As many of you know, and I've mentioned before that I'm in a grad program at Ball State University with their Center for Information and Communication Sciences. And so we've been delving into all aspects of technology and different types of issues related to technology and our changing world, as well as in our other class that we have kind of brought together with our issues class, an approach that brings about some understanding and consultation. And this week, they really brought the two together, and I was really excited to see that, especially since we're kind of dovetailing already into spring break. But it helped us to focus on this book called the Thinkers Toolkit. Now, every week we've had different things to read and analyze and think about, write upon, and this one really didn't have much to do about technology as we would maybe think of technology. This had a lot to do with, as you can see, how we think and how we go about that process of analysis and bringing together information and seeing where our strengths are as far as our analysis and where our weaknesses are, or what we're missing, what we need to look at in a different light. In this book, I was glad for the extra time between the two classes to really look at it, because it has a lot of material that either a single person can work through or a group could work through. It's a tremendous resource that by no means am I an expert in it after a week, but it provides some information in there that really opens people up to new ways of analyzing, or maybe a deeper analysis that isn't so much relying on the data that we get from our systems or our software or any of that type of stuff, but it relies on using human processes to really understand complex problems. And this author really does, I think, a tremendous service to people. And this book can easily be picked up in a used paperback, new, not in Audible, but this would be hard to actually listen to in Audible, because this is almost like a textbook where you have to really slow down at certain spots and do some problem solving, sketching on a piece of paper and so on. So there are, as he says, 14 powerful techniques. Some are a little more simpler to implement. Some are complex or just need to be really put through I'll say it this way, a mathematical or a logical exercise where you just kind of keep doing it over and get used to either developing a matrices or realizing that you need to frame problems in different ways and manners. So you're going to go through some exercises. So some exercises are going to take a fair amount of time and actually a fair amount of practice to go through. Some mimic each other in a certain way or are a different rendition of a certain technique. All are valuable so far. I definitely been taking a lot of time, probably spent already a good 7 to 10 hours here or there on this book and writing some about it already. And I wanted to bring to light just a few things that I think are either interesting or are pretty valuable and implementable right away. And the first one that he talks about, and I don't think this is going to be too big of a surprise, especially for an audience like this, but I'll read this quote. He talks about brainstorming. He says, "By brainstorm, I mean the freewheeling process of generating ideas randomly and spontaneously without worrying about their practicality," right? Kind of a lot of big words in there. I mean the freewheeling process of generating ideas randomly and spontaneously without worrying about their practicality. And I think that first section in here, the first 50 pages, he really lays a framework of where we're going to have to develop a mindset where we're going to look at a lot of options and information and put our biases, put our preconceived notions. We're going to have to go through a practice to sort of put them on a shelf very purposely. And brainstorming in this sense, as he describes, is not us just sort of talking about an idea and then quickly coming to a solution where we're, I think you would call that a little bit like spitballing. I'm not sure what the right term for that or right definition for that would be. But brainstorming means that we're not focusing on practicality. We're not looking and trying to scrutinize it too much, because we're just really trying to generate ideas that go out there and then come back and look at them in different ways, not just looking at a practicality standpoint later on in time and weed things out that way, but really looking at some things in a certain light. And so I found that to be really a good place to start, because often we're looking for practical solutions. And no doubt that if we've been in any interviews in our life, we definitely want to bring about how we can implement practical solutions. But really, we need people who are brainstorming and coming up with any ideas so that we can get our creativity flowing in the area of problem solving. And I think that is a basis that he establishes rightfully up front. The other area that I think is very interesting is definitely more nuanced and takes time, but since I have a bachelor's in mathematics, I found it to be very helpful. And I know from my experience in the cattle industry with livestock and expected progeny differences, or cattle statistics, quote unquote, that a weighted ranking in chapter 10 is very, very interesting. He goes through a process of intuitively ranking some movies, right? And then he goes through a paired ranking where you would rank one against the other, A against B, A against C, A against D, and then run through the practice as your list, however long it is. And then he goes through a process where you take the criteria, and this is a tremendous analogy that he uses, where he ranks the criteria. For instance, a movie, the plot of the movie, there is a ranking there, and it's weighted, meaning that there may be 3 criteria, and you rank 1 as 0.5, and 1 is 0.3, and 1 is 0.2, and take the ranking you've come up with in those selected criteria, and then of course it is a weight. And he uses the intuitive ranking, the matched pair ranking, and then the 3 weighted rankings to come up with a final deduction on his example of the movies. And I thought it was very, very helpful, because in that weighted ranking, and I know from dealing with cattle and buying bulls and looking at EPDs, that foundation is very helpful, because it helps smooth out the data and information, and it brings a bit more of a nuanced approach to it, rather than just looking at the raw data, or in this instance, looking at just our sort of raw intuition that may not be very inclusive of certain component pieces. And the last area that I want to touch on is, I think, so valuable. Maybe the simplest tool besides brainstorming that a person could engage in, and that's being a devil's advocate. And he talks about it this way. He says, devil's advocacy will, with virtual certainty, open your mind to new dimensions and perceptions of the problem, poking holes in fallacious, self-serving arguments, and stripping away thinly reasoned and thinly supported analysis. That's the wonder and delight of devil's advocate technique. Basically, you're looking at it from the other side and poking holes in your own argument. That's a tough one to do, and yet I've found from my personal experience evolving as a person in my various thinkings, it was one of the best practices I did because I learned a full aspect of certain components of my life. So I'd be curious your thoughts on certain thinking techniques, and if anybody's read this book, would love to hear from you. Thanks for your time.